Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring guest coming right up who's none other than Sarah Fraser. Now, most of you know Sarah. She was on the show before to share with us her previous book, The Last Highlander, which is an amazing read. And she's here today to share with us her new book, The Prince Who Would Be King, The Life and Death of Harry Stuart. Now, Sarah was awarded in 2012 the Saltire First Scottish Book of the Year for The Last Highlander, which in 2016 also became a New York Times ebook bestseller. A writer and regular contributor to TV and radio, Sarah has a PhD in obscene Gaelic poetry and lives in the Scottish Highlands. So let's welcome to the show our special guest, Sarah Fraser.
Thank you, Marianne. Delighted to be with you all the way from the Highlands.
Oh, do you know what? And what beautiful highlands you have out there. My goodness. You know, I just recently returned from a trip in Scotland myself and love Scotland. Absolutely love it.
Thank you. So do I.
Well, do you know, and to kind of dive, and gosh, we've had you on the show once before, had the great opportunity of talking about your last book, and I'd love for you to share with us, you know, what inspired you to write this book, The Prince Who Would Be King?
Several things. I saw in Westminster Abbey in London, I was just walking around there, and I saw a little naked wooden mannequin without a head, and it was clearly very, very old. And when I asked who he was, they said it's Henry Stuart, Prince of Wales, grandson of Mary, Queen of Scots, and son of James VI and I. He should have been the first king of Great Britain. And he looked so forlorn lying there on that little white slab. And I wondered how he had got into that state. Was it just wear and tear over 400 years? And then I learned that, in fact, this little mannequin was stripped by souvenir hunters because his death was so grieved when he died early. But I thought, but he's been forgotten by history, and who is he? What had he done? And who was he? And where did he come from? That he deserved a state funeral, and then that he ended up as this forlorn little chap lying on a slab in Westminster Abbey.
Oh my goodness, what a fabulous story. Well, and as you were doing your research on, you know, Henry Stuart, what were some of the things that you discovered that really kind of surprised you?
I suppose what surprised me is what was expected of them in those days. I mean, he was born in Scotland in 1594, when all the countries of Britain, more or less, were separate and independent. And he was trained to be king almost from the moment he's born. So from the age of 4, he's being educated, and it is the expectation that he will learn Latin, he can handle a sword, he will learn about ballistics and all the martial arts. He will be sending his first diplomatic letter to the leader of a foreign power by the age of 6. And I've got 2 sons. I don't know about you. I've got 2 sons. And I didn't expect an awful lot of them. Actually, I'd hate to hear me say this, but I didn't expect a lot of them until they were about 21, probably. And but from the age of 4, a lot is expected of Henry. And he seemed also to just be the great unifier spanning Scotland and England and the creation of Great Britain that will go on to be such a power in the following decades and centuries.
Well, and you talk about in your book that, you know, that was really kind of the birth of Great Britain. And I'd love for you to share with us about that.
Well, when Elizabeth I, Gloriana, who defeated the Armada, when she dies in 1603, this Scottish royal family suddenly descend on London. And they are effectively foreigners. None of them have ever seen anything of England. Henry's mother is called Anne of Denmark, and she is more cosmopolitan. She's come from Denmark. She knows Europe. James went there to pick her up and bring her home when he married her. But effectively, they've been in Scotland. And when they unite the crowns in 1603, Great Britain is born. And it is a time of huge turbulence. Everything is changing. The world is growing enormously. There are feelers coming out towards America to establish colonies there. There is turbulence in Europe in that the Protestant Reformation is a bit on the back foot and the Catholic powers are resurgent and the Protestant powers are looking for a leader and they're wondering what's coming out of this new country that will be Great Britain. And Henry, an awful lot is on his shoulders. You know, from the age of 10, when he gets to London, he is expected to receive diplomats and to be forging alliances and also daunting enemies, really. But he's, as I said to you, he's been ready for that from birth in Stirling. This precious child has been identified as, even in his baptism when he was 6 months old, a poet talked about the Scoto-Britannic prince who will lead a Scoto-Britannic people to defeat the Catholic powers of Europe. And he's a 6-month-old baby lying in his cradle in this wonderful chapel at Stirling Castle. So there's talk about a weight of expectation on his shoulders.
Oh my goodness, it's unbelievable to think of that now. If someone, you're having a child be born and say, okay, well, this is the next ruler, and these are the things that that are expected of him. It's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure, and he was, as you know from the book, he was separated from his parents at birth in order to be made into this symbol, this living, dynamic symbol. His mother, it broke her heart. She was not even allowed to have the guardianship of her child. He was put in Stirling Castle, which I think you visited. It's this semi-fortress palace castle on a crag. It's virtually impregnable. And the message you're getting from that is, if you put someone in here, you have a reason to put them somewhere impregnable. Because from the moment he's born, there are kidnap threats and assassination threats against him from the Catholic powers. Because if this child comes to the throne, he will pose a significant threat to Catholic Europe. And he's also being trained, but he's also being trained by politically progressive people who have picked up a lot of ideas about not exactly democracy, in fact, nothing like what we would recognize as democracy. But this is the Renaissance. They've been reading their history. They know that Rome under the Caesars, the Renaissance is the great rebirth of classical learning. They know that in the classical era, Rome under the Caesars became corrupt until you ended up with Nero, whereas Rome under the Senate, when it was a republic and the leader was merely primum inter pares, the first among equals, was a much healthier, more dynamic society. And there are men who've picked all this up and they're feeding this into Henry as well. So he's picking up an enormous amount from a very early age.
It sounds like he has the best tutors that are around. And it's interesting when you talk about the power of the Catholic Church in Europe at that time. I don't think a lot of people realize exactly how powerful that was and how all-encompassing it was in many ways. I mean, they did a lot of picking with it, as far as making sure that different leaders would be in place that are in favor of the church, and then to have a prince that may come along that might upset that power struggle, to hear that they're also possibly have assassins are out to get him. It just seems it's like most people wouldn't believe that would even happen, but that's so much the truth. It
is. Well, you think in our day, we fear any totalitarian regime that would control any aspect of our lives. If you think of our kind of gut reaction against Islamic fundamentalism or communism, say, we believe in a lot of liberty and human rights and freedom of choice. And of course, the Protestant religion had been born as a protest and an assertion of the right to debate and to roll back the interference of the Catholic Church and its kind of shock troops, the Jesuits. So there was, fear of popery was, it could dissolve alliances like nothing else in Europe. And all through this period, Europe is sadly dividing along religious lines into two sides. And they will, just after Henry's death, that is why he's so important to them in his lifetime. Just after his death, there will be the most almighty conflagration called the 30 Years' War. It went on for 30 years and involved nearly all of Europe. And nearly half the population of some German states will die. And it is partly about religion. But of course, religion at that time, as it is now, a lot of the institutions of religion, like the Catholic Church, wish to have what we would call secular power, power in the world. So they want to control countries and governments, and as you say, appoint rulers. And for example, half the fight over America, Henry wanted to go and plant the British race for the first time in America in order to claim it for Protestantism, simply because Spain had built itself a huge empire, a Catholic American empire, off the back of gold and silver from South America in the previous century. So it's all, like it is in all our lives, it's a mixture of worldly ambition and high-minded values. And if you can knit together your high-minded value, which is I wish to bring you the truth and light of my faith, and also make myself fabulously rich in the process, then that's very, very seductive.
Mm-hmm. Easy. Yeah, you look at that and they're like, that would be a way to go. And what's interesting, I'd love for you to share with us how, Europe felt about Henry, as he was growing up and becoming established, because there was so much turmoil when you look at, what's going on with the Protestant and the Catholic churches, and there are quite a few other things going on as well. How did Europe feel about Henry?
Well, the Protestant wing were delighted, and as he grew up, he took as his motto, "Glory is the torch of the upright mind," which really means heroic deeds winning glory on the field of battle. And they thought, fantastic, we've got a militant prince. He's internationalist, he's European and global and outward looking, he's being educated in a progressive politics. Given that kings rule as absolute rulers, still and all, Parliament is going to become very important very quickly. And they like him. And conversely, the Catholic powers hate and fear the potential of him. So that I think even most of your listeners in America will have heard of Guy Fawkes and the Gunpowder Plot. In 1605, Guy Fawkes set out. He set out to bring off a terror plot of awesome ambition. He wished to destroy the entire political nation. He was a Catholic malcontent, and there were three other Catholics. They had watched Henry and his family come south. James VI and First is the king. In 1603, they had high hopes. Henry's mother has converted to Catholicism by that time, and they thought, right, we're going to win some tolerance for the Catholics in Great Britain. And when that didn't happen, they became more than disappointed and came up with what history now remembers as the Gunpowder Plot. And they intended to blow up and destroy with a vast bomb the entire political nation, both houses of Parliament, most of the royal family, including Henry. As Guy Fawkes said, we're going to blow you beggarly Scots back over your mountain. And he and a Catholic priest, Father Edward Garnet, when they were discussing this plot, they agreed, as they said, that the son who comes after this king, i.e. Henry coming after James, is more important. One, because he guarantees an endless Protestant succession. Britain will never become Catholic again. And two, because he is such a dynamic character. I mean, he is getting some celebrity status across Europe.
And why is he getting celebrity status? Is it because of just what he represents? Or has he done anything at this point that people are really taking notice?
Well, at this point, he's beginning to take off. So what you do, because foreign policy is really what the royal family is about. What kings do, they reign and rule. They rule as well as reign. Our queen now, Queen Elizabeth II, merely reigns. She does not rule. In fact, must not have any part in politics. Kings then ruled as well as reigned. And their purpose was to make war or not make war. The when, the how, the why. So they are very important for that. And Henry's court has become where the military, the martial wing of the British establishment gathers, because Henry's father saw himself as Europe's Solomon. He called himself the King of Peace. That's what he saw himself as. So he was never going to be a threat to anybody. And if there was an armed conflict, he would be most reluctant to join in. And Henry wouldn't. And he is also sending people out across Europe to pick up intelligence about what is going on. There are little premonitory shocks. It's rather like the lead up to any big war. You don't know which is the one that's actually going to trigger the war. And you have little battles and little conflicts before. And he becomes head of what is called the Evangelical Union, which is the Evangelical Union of Protestant princes. And they are pledged to come to each other's aid should they be invaded. And he is also, culturally, he is making himself impressive. I mean, the image mattered in those days. You projected an image to your allies and your enemies. You collected vast amounts of paintings. You built huge palaces. You collected coins, antiquities, manuscripts. You collected scientists around you, explorers, and all of these people built up what's called your royal prestige, which would make powerful people wish to be your allies and your enemies think twice about attacking you because you're too well connected and you're too competent. And Henry he can't do everything himself. I mean, he never actually leaves the country. So he has to send proxies out. He sends proxies out all the way to Chesapeake Bay. He sends proxies out east across Europe to represent him, diplomats at foreign courts. And he is positioning himself in European politics so that he is someone to be reckoned with.
It was probably way too dangerous for him to even, travel abroad with all the things going on. It sounds like it was extremely complicated at the time.
Very, but he wanted to because he's a young man. Because, we're talking about him, who he is in politics and to Britain and also to Europe and beyond. But he's still a boy and he's still a youth and he is passionate about the Navy. And one of the things one of his followers says is that he commissioned ships to be built, small ships and larger ships. And one particular small one, it said that Henry had told him he wished to solace himself by going out upon the small sea, which is, of course, the channel between, just to get some freedom where he could be himself and be alone. And I think, and the thrill, you can imagine it as a young man, the thought of going out in a ship across the ocean with so much of the world unknown that you might actually discover new places would be so attractive and glamorous to him. And I think he was both real as a boy and recognizable to us, and also as this slightly strange person who is a crown prince in that era.
Yeah. It seems that there was a lot that was expected of him. I know in your book you talk about one of the many things he did is rebuild the Royal Library and amass different things as well, which has become part of the world-class collections that are in existence today.
Yes, he has. He was left one library, and he basically used that as the basis of the Royal Library, and he and his father James refounded the Royal Library at St James's Palace, and they built a library for it with shelves and desks. And of course, what a library like that will do is attract the finest minds who are groundbreaking in science and exploration and mathematics, and they ask, because of the materials he's got there, they ask to come and serve him and use his library. He bought 3,000 books in his lifetime, which for us with Amazon is very easy to do. You just go click, click, click. But that was an enormous number of highly expensive books, and he bought more books in 3 years than his father did in his entire life. And his father was considered a bookish and scholarly man. And he, for example, he attracted men like Edmund White, and the people who had gone with Walter Raleigh to Roanoke in the 1580s to try and establish that Roanoke community, and had created the first dictionary of the Algonquin language in some form, some phonetic form. And Walter Raleigh is in the Tower of London through most of Henry's English life, but he is in communication with him because a lot of Raleigh's friends visit Raleigh and then come back to Henry. And you see there is this fermentation of ideas, and Henry's reach goes beyond the mere boy sitting in St James's Palace. The Medici in Florence send him a fine collection of bronzes when they're trying to court him and get his hand in marriage for their daughter. In Venice, his best friend, really, a man called John Harrington, meets art dealers effectively and buys up whole collections and brings them back. And you're right, the Queen's Royal Collection, a lot. It's interesting how many paintings, when they're turned over, they've got this little HP, Henricus Princeps, the Prince Henry, this little sort of cipher stamped on the back. You can still see them. I mean, it was an enormous thrill in the British Library when I opened up some of his books, and they're bound in red velvet, and they've got gold embroidery of the fleur-de-lis of the Prince of Wales. And when you open them up, particularly the books, which haven't hardly seen the light of day, so the colours are not faded, they shine like jewels. They're fabulous. And it's a strange thing, holding something that he held 400 years ago.
That must have been such a remarkable experience. Is that, and I'm sure that they, allowed you to do that because of who you are. I mean, my goodness, you're, this just amazing writer and scholar as well, so they probably were like, hey, no problem, we'll open up all these books to you.
Yeah, it was lovely. I mean, it is, it's there's something about it that puts you back into their world. I mean, one of his books is, it's very, let's say, frank. There's a man called Coriat's Crudités, like little sort of appetizers you have before a meal. One of his sort of associates who courted him at court went out across Europe, and he basically wrote the first travel guide to Europe, and this is it, Coriat's Crudités. And he came back and he gave a copy to Henry and one to his parents and his brother and sister. And to have that, and he's giving you advice about exchange rates and how not to get ripped off, and don't bother with the Frankfurt Book Fair because it'll be too crowded, which was going back then. And what not to eat. And he describes things like a fork. No one had ever seen a fork before. And this is what you do with it when you come across it. I mean, don't scratch your head with it. You eat with it. And an umbrella. But an umbrella from ombre, shade, was used first, of course, to shield people from the sun. And he thought, wow, we've got another use for that in rainy old England. We can use it for that. But he also, of course, described, which you would not see in the Lonely Planet Guide today, he described visiting a famous courtesan in Venice, because Venice was famous for courtesan, tripes, and Venetian wine. And so he describes all of these things, and he thinks that's perfectly reasonable to put down in a book that you would then present to your prince. It's hilarious. You know, he does say that he only went to the door of the courtesan's room, as it were. He says that. But you see what I mean? You suddenly get a feel for their world. I mean, everybody laughing their heads off saying, yeah, right. You know, but it does give you a nice feel for the world. And I tell you another thing that was brilliant that I saw, and you can see if you get a reader's card, anyone can get a reader's card, and you ask to see it, is the first ever map of the Chesapeake Bay area, made in 1607 by Henry's gunner, called Robert Tyndall, who went out on that first voyage when they landed at First Landing, and he made this map and sent it back. And it's about 3 or 4 feet wide and about 3 feet deep. And again, it's extraordinary to gaze on that. You know, it is beautiful. It's on vellum, so it's on beaten hide, basically. It's quite thick. It's in wonderful condition. Again, bright, bright colours in the borders. But as I said one of the most shocking things to me seeing it is, from where we are in history, is how empty it is. You know, it's got Cape Henry there, and Jamestown, and Henrico, which is now a part of Richmond, Virginia, and all these early tiny, tiny settlements. And then there is nothing. There is this huge continent stretching out before them. And of course, you know, from a colonialist point of view, here was this country, empty country in their eyes. I'm not defending it. I'm saying this is how it looked for them to fill in, you know. And so, you know, sort of post-colonial guilt makes you go, ooh, really, you know. What about the native Indian population? But the historian in you that's trying to get back into their shoes feels their wonder, the wonder at standing on that shoreline, and anything is possible. Henry wanted to come to Virginia to rule directly for a short while as a regent for his father there. That's quite a thought, isn't it? Because you know, you've never had a king actually ruling directly on your soil, have you? I'm just, not to be recommended particularly, but it would have been interesting.
Well, on that note, we are going to pause here for a quick break. We've been talking with Sarah Fraser in regards to her new book, The Prince Who Would Be King. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed, and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 123 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Sarah Fraser, straight from Scotland, and she's sharing with us her new book, The Prince Who Would Be King. Okay, so Sarah, before we left for break, I've read your book, and my goodness, there's this part in there that I've got questions about. So Henry has been called the heir of Virginia, and I'd like for you to expand on that for us, because when we look at U.S. history, it doesn't make sense to a lot of Americans, but when we look back in Scottish history and just the history of the islands there, it makes perfect sense. And I'd love for you to expound upon that.
It was enormously important. And, the Spanish were furious, that because they claimed what they called New Spain, all of it, North America, South America. And they were incensed when the Virginia Company was set up and Henry was part of it and a lot of his friends put money into it. And it was this long cherished dream which had gone back to the previous reign of Elizabeth I and Sir Walter Raleigh and Roanoke to try and establish a foothold in America. And it's for two reasons. One, trade, because they're always looking to, the Stuarts are always broke. And one of the ways you can increase your income is by trade. And they had looked to Spain and how rich Spain had become in the 1500s. The King of Spain stood on his balcony in his palace in Madrid and just shrugged his shoulders and said, the world is not enough. He'd become so rich and so powerful by that point. And they thought, we'll have a piece of that. And Henry also wanted to claim the country for God, the Protestant God. So 13 years before the Mayflower and the Pilgrim Fathers, these little ships set out in 1607, the Godspeed and the Susan Constant, and they sail out and they claim, they land at the place that you now call First Landing and Cape Henry, and they put their flag down and they claim it for Britain. And it was, what they foresaw was building the New Jerusalem there. What a lot of the people who went out with Henry saw was a place where they could build a New Jerusalem and it would be godly, but also where, as they said, Englishmen could enjoy their liberties. So there's a little bit of sticking your elbows out and getting away from living under an absolute monarchy. And they established a college there, Henrico College, for educating ministers to spread the word, and also educating the native people that they found there. And, we all know the whole complicated history of that, but to them it was a dream of a kind of earthly paradise, really. That's what they were hoping to set up, was heaven on earth. Heaven on earth in Virginia. That's what it was going to be.
Well, and heaven on earth can be in Virginia. It's just interesting how history played out, and between the Spanish and we have Henry Stuart as well, staking his claim. I mean, and then we look at the dynamics between the churches as well, with the Catholic and Protestant church. I mean, he's really amassing, while he's at a very young age, a lot of enemies while he's trying to just make his stake in the world.
Yes, he is. And you've seen that right from the beginning. I mean, I can think of several things. When he's a tiny child, he is, I would say, 6 or 7 years old. He is sitting on his horse watching his father, who's mad about hunting stags with his friends. And people say, "Sire, do you love to hunt like your father does?" And little Henry nods and he says, "Yes, I do. But when I grow up, I shall hunt rebels and thieves with brave men on powerful horses, and those I catch, I shall hang the great ones higher than all the rest." He is completely aware that not everybody loves him, and that the Catholic powers would either neutralize him or would kidnap and assassinate him. They would kidnap him, forcibly convert him, or they would assassinate him. And he is aware of that from a young age. And he is personally, his mother's a Catholic, he's personally tolerant of Catholic men and women, but in terms of politics, and religion was politics then, as heavens, you look at the Middle East, it is now, he was aware that it wasn't possible for him to be ecumenical in an old way. I think what happened in the last half of the 1500s, Elizabeth I said, "I do not wish to make windows into men's souls," i.e., toe the line and do your job, and I'm not going to ask too many questions. And then Henry's parents, who are, one's a Protestant, one's a Catholic, and they've got a different kind of Protestant son. There is a kind of tolerance implicit, not explicit, but it's implicit, possible then, that is not possible afterwards when the lines are hardening, when Protestant Europe fears this reviving Catholic Europe, that they will roll back across Europe, they will reclaim all the monasteries, the millions of acres, all the property that was taken from the Catholic Church after the Reformation. They will prevent Protestants worshipping. They'll throw them out of their churches. They fear the loss of so much, and they're right to fear that. The tone of the times is becoming more militant, so he can't afford to be wishy-washy about it. He just can't.
It's amazing at such a young age. Those are his answers. It just he must have some great minds that are helping him to discover the path that he's going to be on at such an early age. And it has me question his political philosophy and philosophy in general. I'd love for you to share a little bit about that with us.
His political philosophy, he had he survived, would have been an absolute ruler. And in the end, an absolute ruler has absolute power. But he is, you're right, being trained by some very great men. There's a man called Robert Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury, who is probably the greatest statesman of his age. And opposing the idea of the absolute ruler who can rule by diktat almost, is the idea of the king in Parliament, i.e. Parliament being the highest law court in the land. The king in Parliament is agreeing to be under the law. And they want to train, they are trying to train Henry in that, to be a king in Parliament, to acknowledge that he must always rule through Parliament with parliamentary consent, by law, by passing laws, and not merely by suspending Parliament and ruling practically as a dictator, what we call personal rule. And his brother would make that mistake with knobs on. I don't think Henry would, because a lot of the people around Henry are what we call, this type of politician is called a constitutional aristocrat. Yes, they believe in the aristocracy and that they should rule, but that there is an idea of a constitution and the law and the common law and parliament, and the king should rule through that, not above it. His younger brother, Charles I, who inherits from him, will argue with Parliament and in a completely high-handed way suspend it, rule personally for 12 years, and the end result of that is what we have over here, the Civil War. Cromwell, war throughout the three kingdoms, and a Cromwellian Puritan republic for 12 years, where it's pretty grim. It becomes a religious dictatorship then. It's sort of, and they suspend Christmas. It's like Game of Thrones north of the Wall. It's always winter and never Christmas. It's just not much fun.
Yeah.
And then they bring the monarchy back, of course, in 1660. But I think Henry would not have done that. He would not have led the country into that civil war. He'd have led them abroad on a religious war, but I don't think we'd have had civil war here, which is a terrible, terrible thing. I mean, we see it on the TV every night. In the Middle East, the horrors, Syria, for example, of civil war. There's, it just tears a country to bits.
Yeah, and what kind of, it's really interesting when religion gets involved in politics. And to have it, to look at it and look at this piece of history and, how Henry Stuart really was, he was kind of like the new age, going to be the new age of, of just that era.
Yes, I think so. I think he inherited the old way, but he was very modernizing in other ways. But he was very much a man of his time as well. So, for example, we talked so much about how he was frankly doing his duty. Well, in those days, your duty, what you had to do was find out your duty and do it. These days we talk about rights and rights and rights and rights, and we don't think about responsibilities so much. He knew he was born, he had a social role and a social duty, and that, not for one moment would he ever have done anything else except work as hard as he could to fulfill that as best he could. Their sense of the individual was very, very different from ours. Their sense of liberty and as I say, when you look at young people now, and they're actually not young people, it's ever since the Romantic movement, the birth of individualism and romantic individualism, they didn't have that. They were social beings, and you looked to the examples of the past and you tried to fulfill your social function as best you could. Profoundly social.
Yeah, and it seemed that people were much more creative as well, because I know there was a piece in the book that talks about when Henry was, had a couple of different ambitions going on, where he was trying to remove silver from lead, and he had all these different things that were happening.
Yeah.
But
I think that.
It's like regardless if they worked or not, at least he was trying,
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was up at 5 a.m. and on the go, and he worked all day. I mean, he had his public duties, but he is working actually to rule, and people will depend on him for their livelihoods, not only throughout the entire territories of the Prince of Wales, which means Wales and Cornwall and Chester and a lot of land. He feels he rules for the benefit of the Commonwealth, i.e. the common weal, the common good. And they're very much all-rounders. We specialize. You are a scientist, or you're an artist, or you're a religious person, or you're something. But they are all-rounders. So he is interested in art, passionately interested in art and architecture and creating a fabulous setting for him. And he is interested in the latest development in martial arts and the arts of warfare. And yes, people can come along and say, I've got a great business idea. They called it projecting. They were great projectors. And he would receive people, and some of the ideas are just nutty, extracting silver from lead, You're approaching alchemy at this point, but other things, for example, someone came up with a great business idea for making furnaces more fuel efficient. Well, hey, who doesn't want that? It's what we all want for fuel efficiency. And he was received every day. Someone would say, "Sarah, I've got someone you really should see. He's got a great idea, and you might want to put some money in." I mean, that's the Virginia company. Do you want to invest in this? And we'll go and give birth to British America. Yes, please.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it's just such a fabulous time where ideas were just flowing, it seemed like. And it's interesting. I mean, his life encompassed so much, and we're not even touching the tip of the iceberg with our discussion here. And even though we're kind of going over a loose outline of his life, I mean, there's so much detail. And, I find so fascinating that you can actually find these details, that he was up at 5 a.m. doing specific types of work, that information is available.
Yes, it is. Well, that's the great thing about a royal subject, is everyone's talking about them, because they are reporting back. People who have an interest in trying to get into Henry's good books, or trying to influence him, or getting his ear for some reason, they're all writing to each other. What's he like? What does he say? What does he feel about this? And of course, a lot of those things were preserved because they were royal communications. So you do get, even for someone like Henry, an extraordinarily good picture, and you get these little insights as well. For example, one night when he launched his great ship, the Prince Royal. This was going to be his flagship that he was going to come to Virginia and rule Virginia from. And Walter Raleigh took one look at it, the design, and said, "No, never. You're building it wrong. It's too heavy on top. It'll sort of list over." And Henry went on anyway with a young man's confidence. And then when he launched it, it was found to be too fat to get out of the dock. It couldn't get through the dry dock from where it had been built until the tide was hugely high, and he brought down his father and his mother and the whole court down to the royal docks, and they sat around for a couple of hours getting increasingly irritated and rolling their eyes, and then they said, "Henry, I'm sorry, we're just going to go back now." And he and his friends waited, and what we read is basically they had a hell of a party. They thought, well, we're going to wait till high tide because this ship is going to be launched. And he was having 21-gun salutes fired off. Typical young man, not thinking about the people who've got to get up and work in the morning, having a great party, fired from the banks, drinking, toasting the ship, toasting the river, throwing the cup into the Thames. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, lo and behold, there was a creaking and groaning, and the ship tottered out on the Thames into the middle of the river. I'm sure to huge cheers and hoorays. But you get an awful lot of that. I can recognize that, a young man with a great plan. We're going to go and launch this battleship, and it'll be a wonderful party, and not thinking to consult the tide tables.
Yeah.
It's those sort of little anecdotes you get, and you think, aha, that's him,
But they did make do, and that's the interesting part. It's like, hey, and it's so I'm just in awe that you have access to all these and have been able to dive into its history as much as you have and bring about this book, because I mean it's such a great read. Regardless.
Thank you.
For anyone that's like interested in history, it was just fabulous. And I think I have time for a couple more questions. We're going to kind of skip over a few things, and we're not going to cover everything because, of course, people, history is history, but you have it presented in such a way that, just compels the reader to just flip through every page and continue. We come to the point when Henry's supposed to, now he's going to get married, and he has options. And I found it really interesting how these different countries were kind of vying for position of who would be his wife.
Yeah, they were. And mostly what he wanted was a Protestant princess. He wanted to make an alliance with a Protestant power. But the people offering most money were the Catholic powers. And Henry's advisors were furious because they felt their prince was being sold to the highest bidder, basically. And they said so in Parliament. Henry's parents were broke at the time. They were permanently broke. The Earl of Salisbury called their finances an ignis edax, a consuming fire. They just couldn't control their budget at all. And Henry wrote to his father, and he outlined the options. I could marry the Princess of Savoy. I could marry a Medici. You're talking about me marrying maybe a princess from France, or maybe one of the princesses of the Spanish throne, etc., etc. And he tries to dodge the bullet at the moment and say, it may not be the time for me to be in love with any of them yet. And James doesn't like this because he knows what Henry is doing is on the side. He's planning his marriage to a Protestant princess, that's what he's really looking at, because that's what he believes, that's part of his role. But he shilly-shallies, basically. It's again, what I love about this era is it's so recognizable and so odd. We are talking about the marriages between crown princes and princesses. And yet it's also parents saying, you really need to get on with it, son, and you should and make an honest woman of one of these women. We can't keep them hanging on. It's humiliating for all of them. And he's trying to keep them at bay, saying, I will make up my own mind. And to a certain extent, that's true. They could force him to marry someone, but James is not the sort of person to do that. He's a very good father in lots of ways. And Henry he's arranged the marriage of his sister, and what he's really hoping to a Protestant is to accompany her back to Germany and basically put out feelers to one of the daughters of the princes of the Evangelical Union, one of his fellow princes of the Evangelical Union, and it will reinforce their political, their religious, their geographical ties. And so he's trying not to answer his father's letters, basically, when his father drums the table and says, okay, which one is it? And he tries to avoid that.
Well, and because they're looking at it from a financial point, going, okay, well, we need to have a princess that has money. So.
Yeah. And he says, why? Just to cover a temporary hole in your budget, which will open up again next year. He's... As I said, you were talking about him, it being him coming alive. I mean, a biographer has to do that because it's both history and biography, and because the biography bit is you've got to bring him to life, and it's that thing of a golden youth. That's what I really liked about him. He's unsullied, untrammeled. He can be judgmental, he can be infuriating, he can be overconfident and see the world in black and white. In a way, I mean, I may be letting my own sons down here, but that's, my boys can be like that, but there is something beautiful about them. There is a purity about them that you just laugh and think, well, good luck. I hope it all comes off for you, although it won't.
Yeah, I hope that boat can set sail,
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, and I mean, my goodness, I mean, your book, is just amazing. Your last book, The Last Highlander, loved that book too, and I know it was a New York Times best ebook seller, so that was just very exciting. And I can easily see that this will join the ranks because of just what a beautiful read it is. I mean, you write in such a way, again, it's really almost poetic. I mean, everyone wants to pick up your book and read it.
Oh, Marianne, thank you very much indeed.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, and then, Sarah, so where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
I tweet on Sarah_Fraser UK, and also I've got a Facebook page, Sarah_Fraser UK, and on so Twittering and Facebook, and I also have a website, Sarah Fraser, UK, sarahfraser.co.uk, and it's and I comment on things about the Highlands and just going on here and Scotland, and to do with history and to do with life. Anything that occurs to me that I see. Yeah.
Well,
I was at a Comic-Con conference last week, so I was talking about Outlander and Scottish history while we were protected by 10 stormtroopers from Star Wars. You never know where life's going to get you, do you?
Well, I have to look for those pictures. I think I missed those ones on your Instagram page because I could have sworn I did not see that. You must be doing that for another day. But, it's interesting because, the Highlands are beautiful. Scotland's absolutely gorgeous. Just a beautiful country. And you bring to life, Scotland and just the whole era with the Prince Who Would Be King. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. It's very good to talk to you.
My goodness, thank you so much, Sarah. It is always such a pleasure to spend time with you. And I love talking about your books and hearing you explain just how that all comes together in Scotland. What a magical country. I can't wait to go back. Again, if you'd like to connect with Sarah Fraser and learn more about her new book, The Prince Who Would Be King, you can at her website, sarahfraser.co.uk. Make sure to connect with her on social media and be part of her community. I've done it. I love getting those inspirations of Scotland. It makes you just want to drop everything here and run to that island. It's fabulous over there, and go for a visit. Well, we are at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.